For this unit and this video, this is video number 1, we're going to be discussing meat. So meat is a very important part of food service operation menus. It's really important to know and understand the basics of meat. Here are the vocabulary terms which we're going to be talking about and you guys are going to be working with in this particular unit. This presentation is found linked in your instructional materials. So when we talk about meat, we are talking about the flesh, the muscle of animals that is used for food. Here in the United States, the common ones that are eaten are beef, veal, pork, lamb, rabbit, and venison. In other countries, some other forms and types of meat may be particularly consumed, in which the American culture finds a little weird, but is normal in other cultures. But these are the ones that we are going to be focusing on as we work through this unit. So the structure of meat. So we're talking about the muscle of animals. The most common ones in the American grocery store are cattle and hogs, cattle being cows. So meat is composed of mostly water, protein, and fat. So when you look at different cuts of meat, which will be in the next video, the percentages may change a little depending on where it comes off the animal. Some meat is a little leaner, and that's going to give it a little more protein, a little bit less fat. So some meat is fattier, and that's going to change that. But on an average, that would be an average of what it is. So when we're looking at meat is the muscles are in fibers. So fibers determine the texture and they also contribute to the flavor. So we're going to look at the muscle fibers, the connective tissue, and then the bones. So if you want to look at it from a scientific standpoint, regardless of the animal, when you get into the structure and component of the muscle, essentially you have lots of long, thin strands in which you have that protein and that fat. And then those strands are bundled together. And then those bundles are bundled together a little bit more. And so this is the example of a muscle here. So you have one single muscle fiber, and it is kind of long and thin. There are certain cuts of meat that you can literally see those strands of the muscle fiber, and then those are often bound together, and then they make a larger component, and then you combine those together, and that makes the whole component. For the next video, when we talk about the cuts, knowing about those strands and that structure is really going to come into play and be important. So when we get into fat, we do have two types of fat. So marbling is the fat that is found within the meat. This is going to make the meat more tender. It's going to make it more flavorful, and you're going to have a higher quality with a higher level of marbling. This is the fat that is inside the muscle. So essentially for marbling, you are not cutting that out. The fat cap, on the other hand, this does keep your meat moist and juicy, and so it's important sometimes to leave it on the outside, even if you don't want to eat it. This is on the outside of the muscle. You could trim that off, but depending on your cooking method and your cut, you probably want to leave that on. So here's a photo example of, you can see both the fat cap, which is this thick rind of fat around that muscle tissue, and then you can also see that is very heavily marbled. So let me go back. Let me pause. So when we're looking at marbling in steaks, we are looking at what's inside. And this is going to add a lot of moisture and a lot of flavor. This also adds extra calories. And there are some cuts of steak that are going to be a lot higher in the marbling than others, and that's just going to be more of a personal preference. The next connective tissue is called elastin. So elastin is a protein that's found in this connective tissue. Usually these are tendons. The tendons are what attach that muscle to the bone. Tendons are important so that when you want to move, you can flex those tendons, and that's going to cause those muscles to contract. They may appear as a white or kind of silver coloring, and that is why they are commonly referred to as silver skin. It's also kind of gristle. So this connective tissue will not cook down. It will stay. It may cook, but it's still going to be just kind of gristly and kind of gross in your mouth. So this is a photo of like a beef or pork tenderloin, and you can see here that a lot of times that is cut off as much as possible. Sometimes that silver skin will run down into the meat and you're not able to cut it off, but a lot of times you kind of want to cut that out. The next connective tissue is collagen. So collagen is a connective tissue that does break down. Fat is a type of collagen. Fat does cook. When you apply heat, it's going to cook, it's going to melt. You also have gelatin. So gelatin is found in the bones of animals, and gelatin cooks out of these bones. And this can come into play and be very important for certain food items, such as stock making, which we'll talk about later on in the course. Gelatin is essentially what firms and hardens certain liquids. When you look at something like Jello, or you have something like Starburst candies or Skittles, they contain a certain amount of gelatin. This is generally a meat product. There are vegan products, there is vegan candies, but if you are a full vegetarian, consuming a product with gelatin in it does kind of break that rule a little bit. But essentially, gelatin cooks out of the bones. When it gets cold, it does firm up a liquid. When it gets hot, again, it melts. And so the difference between Kool-Aid and Jello is that gelatin. And you can buy just gelatin in the store, but that is essentially the best way to kind of describe it. You can get gelatin out of vegetable products, which is how we get vegan or vegetarian candies, but it's a lot more expensive and kind of harder to find. So when an animal is first slaughtered, you have a big animal and it is killed. And the bigger the animal, the longer this process takes. It's really important to get the organs out of the animal. As the animal dies, the products that are inside of the animal can poison the meat. So if you know a deer hunter, then this is a process that you may have kind of heard about. But essentially, to just kind of put it mildly, you take an animal and you kill it, and then you gut it. And then that animal really does need to hang for a little while. The bigger the animal, the longer that process. So when the animal goes through the process of rigor mortis, if you've ever watched like a CSI show or anything about forensics, you know that when something dies, you've got a couple of hours before that body stiffens and gets really stiff. And so rigor mortis is when that animal kind of stiffens. And then after a couple of hours, that process is complete, and then the muscles relax back out. If the animal is not hung and aged during that process, if it is butchered or frozen first, then the meat will be called green, and this affects the toughness and the flavor quite a bit, and it's not very good. And so meats go through this aging process that happens right after they are killed. And again, bigger animals, longer process. Wet aging is something that occurs. This is a lot more common with kind of chickens and pork. So meat has a certain amount of enzymes within it, which will act on the meat. They're little living enzymes, and they act on the meat and they tenderize it. They break the connective tissue down, and that's important for that tenderizing. So pre-cut meats are packaged into vacuum sealed packages, and then they can be refrigerated for something like pork, not quite 6 months, or chicken. They can be frozen for a while in that package and then thawed in that package. But as those enzymes break down that connective tissue to make it tender, they produce a byproduct which has a little sulfur in it. And sometimes that meat will develop what's a fart smell. So sometimes when you first open a package of pork or you first open a package of chicken, you might get a whiff of sulfur, and it doesn't mean that it's bad. I do rinse my meat. There's another video on how to safely do that so that you don't spread bacteria, particularly if it's been in the plastic packages. I definitely rinse that off. And once you rinse and dry that off and set that to the side, within a moment or two, that smell should dissipate and go away. If you have that smell that lingers, then that meat may have turned, and you may not want to consume that meat. But chicken and pork, this is just kind of common. There's nothing to be afraid of with it, and it should go away. But that's wet aging, and that's that process that's happening. So when you purchase meat, you want to think about the menu, the cooking method, and the price. And we're going to work through other videos on that. Um, the meat is always expected by the USDA. So if you have a food service operation, you cannot kill or slaughter your own meat that has not been deemed safe and acceptable and serve that by law. And so they do get a stamp, and this reveals that it is fit for human consumption and it is also graded. So when you go to the grocery store or you go to restaurants, sometimes you will see a particular grade that is given to meat. So this is based off of the age of the animal, the flavor, the tenderness, the marbling, and the color. So prime is the best grade. This is the most expensive. This is excellent marbling, a nice thick fat cap. Choice is very accepted in the food service industry and grocery stores. It's a better value, but you may find that those products are not as tender. Select is going to be much lower, more cost effective, and it's going to be a little tougher. It's going to be probably from an animal that's a little older, and you'll definitely see all three of these in restaurants or in grocery stores. And that's going to be the big difference sometimes when you go to a grocery store and you may see the same size of like a ribeye steak, and one might be $19.99 a pound and one is $12.99 a pound, and they're not on sale. That's just their normal price. A lot of that has to do with the grading, and so the price that they can sell an item for. Yield grades 1 through 5 are the lowest. A yield grade is usually not sold in stores as whole meat, and a lot of times that is processed meat. So when you're looking at grading, tenderness, juiciness, flavor, the age, the color, the texture, marbling, this is how we determine it. So we have prime, choice, and select. These are things that you would see in food service and restaurants and grocery stores. Standard and commercial are going to be a much lower grade. And then utility, cutter, and canner, these are food items that are reserved for processed food. So when you have processed food, this is food that has been ground up and it has been mixed with other items, starches, and things, and then reformed to form some other form of meat. Bologna is a good example of that. You also would see hamburgers that are sold on in cheap fast food restaurants, chicken nuggets, hot dogs, spam, canned food, canned meat products. These products are not made with top grade of meat. So they are made with the lower grades of meat. And so that means those animals are older, they're tougher, they don't have a good quality. And that's what we do with those products. So when you purchase meat, it's really, really important that you purchase meat that is below 41 degrees. When you are receiving in the restaurant, you absolutely must test that first. And as soon as it comes off the truck, if that is not up to standard, then you do not accept that delivery. You need to get that into storage right away. So that's your FIFO. Those are your HACCP, your HACCP. These are some policies and procedures that you must follow in that restaurant. So make sure that you get that into storage. When you do place it into storage, they go in the bottom of the refrigerator. They go below fresh food items. You would not ever store raw meat above salad or lettuce or prepared potato salad or something that is a ready to eat food item. So remember RTE, ready to eat. We talked about that in Unit 1. Those are food items that will not be cooked. Either they've been cooked or they will never be cooked like salad. When you freeze fresh meat, it does need to go into the freezer at 0, and it needs to be wrapped in an airtight, moisture-proof packaging. So when you store it, it's really important to make sure that that is 30 to 35 degrees for fresh meat. Make sure that it cannot drip down onto fresh foods. When freezing, the faster the better. Don't wait till something is maybe a little bit turned before you stick it in the freezer. Proper packages can prevent those freezer burn. Freezer burn won't hurt you. It's white and it's kind of discoloration on meat, but it is kind of gross. It's a bad texture. It's not a great taste. You can cut it off if you have freezer burnt meat, but making sure that everything's packaged properly is going to go into factor. And finally, to thaw meat. Do not ever put it on the countertop. Never have it sitting out at room temperature for more than 2 hours. If you remember back to your Fat Tom from Unit 1, time and temperature abuse, that is the most likely factor to grow pathogens and to make people sick. The microwave is not the best way to thaw meat for the best quality. It can cook the edges and it can make things kind of gross. Um, if that's all you have in a pinch, then you can do that. For food service, it's definitely not recommended. You want to put that into a refrigerator for a couple of days. Before you freeze items, it's nice to have a desired quantity instead of trying to freeze the whole package. So if you have a family of two, you go ahead and buy a big package and you portion those out and divide those out. That makes it easier to thaw in the future. A lot of times you do take it out of the shipping container and repackage that to be better so it doesn't get freezer burnt. If you do leave it in the cellophane wrapper, you can put that into plastic. You can further wrap that and help prevent that freezer burn. So you want to thaw it in the refrigerator for 24 to 48 hours. And remember, when things thaw, particularly like chicken, it has a tendency to lose a lot of moisture, and you can get some nasty drippage. So for me, I have a roasting pan in my refrigerator, and I put my meat into that roasting pan. It's just a big cheap pan. A cookie sheet works good too. If you have something under that package, if you do have some leakage, then you don't have to take your whole refrigerator apart and deal with that possible cross contamination. So really important. Make sure you thaw it. So meat is the muscle of animals. Meat is grated. Muscle, connective tissue, fat, and water. Store meat 30 to 35 degrees. Meat is a TCS food item. We talked about that earlier in the course. Temperature controlled substance. That means it must be controlled for pathogen growth.